Chewy.
A little.
So today we're going to talk about a hit from when I was a kid back in the 80s called...
The Goonies!
Right. And we had sort of an 80s throwback weekend this past weekend where we did a little film festival and we watched the Goonies. We watched the original Superman with Christopher Reeve. There was another film I think we tried to watch. And we watched a little bit of Voltron. So we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the other ones at some point. But the Goonies at this point was the big winner because all three of us, of course, I loved it when I was a kid, and it seems as though you and Colton liked it. Did you like it?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you like it?
I liked it because I liked how it was a good story, and they all had different personalities. And my favorite character was Chunk because he was really funny, and he was the one who got stuck in the freezer with ice cream with the dead body. So.
And he was also, he wound up palling around with your other character, the other character that you were like intrigued by, it seemed like.
Sloth.
Sloth, right. So interestingly, this movie has a lot of, again, when I was watching it as a kid, these were young actors, a lot of them I had never seen before, and they went on to be fairly well-known stars. So there's Sean Astin was Mikey, Chunk you already mentioned, which was Jeff Cohen. I don't know that he did very much. I've seen pictures of him since. He looks nothing like he did in the movie. Someday I'll show you a picture of him. Corey Feldman, Jonathan Ke Quan, at the time was Ke Huy Quan, I believe, and he was in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. I had seen him there, and then he was in this film. Josh Brolin, who I actually about 6 years later wound up working with at a regional theater because he came for a summer theater festival with Anthony Zerbe. He was working with Anthony Zerbe on The Young Riders, and he came to the regional theater I was working at, and he was in one of the plays that Anthony Zerbe was directing. He's a really nice guy. I fought the urge to mention that I loved the Goonies at the time. So they were all, Martha Plimpton's in there, Cary Green, all became relatively well known after that. Jeff Cohen and Cary Green, not so much. So really good young actors at the time, a lot of fun. What were your favorite parts of the movie?
When the younger kids went on their bikes and they tied up Brandon in the chair, and then they flipped the chair over, and then they rode their bikes to the lake, ocean.
To the coast, yeah. To the coast.
And then they found the building,
the restaurant.
Yeah. And then Brandon had to go on that little children's bike.
Because they let the air out of the tires on his bike, right? They had a lot of funny segments in it to get where they were going. And it was very, very cool. It was like a kid's Indiana Jones in a way. It really felt like
because
that.
of the adventure part?
The adventure part, yes. And they were looking for the buried treasure and everything, which I thought was a lot of fun.
And One-Eyed Willie.
Very good. Now, you did mention earlier, so again, for the parents out there, you mentioned earlier that Chunk was in the freezer with the dead body.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and the ice cream.
Yes, and the ice cream. So there are some elements in here that would be somewhat questionable. There's a segment where Corey Feldman's character, who's called Mouth, do you remember that? Because he's mouthy. He's interpreting Spanish because they have help. The mother's broken her arm, so she needs some help around the house, and the person who's helping only speaks Spanish. And Mouth says he'll help Mom and he'll interpret for her. And so the mother will say, "Oh, please, put this here," or something like that. And he's reinterpreting it in Spanish and making up things to scare the maid or to kind of freak the maid out. And what happened there, and it goes by so fast. Lainey can read, but it goes by so fast that she couldn't read it fast enough. So I was reinterpreting that for her. And Colton, of course, can't read. So that was okay. The violent aspects, we watched a somewhat edited version for TV, so it didn't really get too heavy into that. So I don't think any of that bothered you, and you knew that the dead body was fake. It wasn't a real dead body. And they played that for humor, so I think it was okay.
Did they just do like the one of the thingies at Old Navy that's not a real person and then put makeup on it?
Oh, like a
With
mannequin?
Uh-huh.
A mannequin? It might have been a mannequin. I think it might have been a person made up to look that way, but it could have been. You know, I'm not in on that. But it didn't. Did it bother you? Okay, and it didn't bother Colton either.
It was a little scary though.
So what was scary about it? Because you had told me that night you were like, "Ooh, it's scary, but I like it." So why was it scary? What was scary, and why was it scary to you?
It wasn't scary, but it was scary because I put myself into it. Then I think, how would I feel when I would be put into it? So when the dead body fell onto him, I would be scared.
But Chunk wasn't. He was scared, but he played it for humor. So I couldn't ever deter because he kept pushing the body up and talking to it. So I don't know if I would be that.
Stay.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know if I would be that calm, cool, and collected in that situation. But he was an actor, and it was being played for humor, and they played it that way on purpose. So now I'm going to ask you a question, and think about how I'm going to word this. When we talked about the Avengers, and I asked if any of that bothered you, you said no because you know, your words were, I know that they're actors and they're playing parts and whatever else. This one, you're saying I put myself in their place and I feel like how they would feel. Why is it different in this type of movie than in the superhero movie for you?
Because in this movie, it's a bunch of kids but they're kids, like my age.
Okay,
and
that makes sense.
And there's only like one teenager in the beginning and then two other people.
So you can
are
relate
older.
more because these are kids in the situation, whereas in the superhero movies, they're not kids. Okay, that makes sense. I get that. You mentioned something about it being a mystery too, and with mysteries, you look at it differently. You said something about that after we watched it. What I don't.
It's the same thing with mystery books. When I read a book that's not a mystery, I enjoy it and I like it. Same thing for mysteries, but for mysteries, I also put myself into it and think how I would feel.
That's kind of interesting. That's interesting to me. So that's a different take on it. But it makes a lot of sense what you're saying. Kids your age, you put yourself in their situation, and that's why a lot of times in science fiction movies, Star Wars was the original Star Wars was the first one that I could remember in recent times where they didn't put a little kid in the original movies. They didn't have a little kid in there. The TV show Battlestar Galactica had a little kid. When Star Trek The Next Generation came out, they had Wesley Crusher. They were always trying to bring in a younger person to relate to kids. The original Star Wars didn't do that. Later they did in Phantom Menace with Anakin being little. As a kid, I never needed that. I didn't feel like I had to have the kid to relate to, but it's interesting to hear you say that because I did relate to these kids because I was younger, but they were a little younger than, they're about the same age as me, so I did relate to them, I guess. So, but they were all kids. You're right. It's a different dynamic, I guess. All right.
Whereas superheroes, they also have powers and they don't.
Right, and it's more of a fantasy, so Okay. Anything else stick out in your mind about this that you wanted to mention?
I liked how the sloth with Chunk, they both rode onto the boat the easy way with no traps because the other children already set off the traps.
Right, so they got to come through faster and not have to deal with it. They saw the after effects of what had happened and they kind of just rode through. Did you notice that when Sloth went down the sail, he had been watching a movie? It's an Errol Flynn movie. I think it's The Seahawk, where Errol Flynn put the knife in the sail and came down, and then he did the same thing on the pirate ship later. There's an interesting story about that, too. When they were filming it, they had the director and the scenic designers and everything had the ship built, and they had it all in that area, in the water and everything. And they had it set up, and they hadn't let any of the young actors see it. So when they came out of the water slide thing
They
and
were
dropped in the water,
actually-
that's their honest reactions because they turned and that was the first time they saw the pirate ship because they had never seen it. And so they got a real sincere reaction out of them. And you could see, when you watch the movie and know that, it's even more special to see that part because you see it through their eyes in a sense, and it's a lot of fun. So I have one little tidbit. I don't know if I ever shared it with you, but it was a special movie for me in a way because your grandfather, my dad, only ever took me to one movie by himself. And it happened to be this movie, and it was by default. I think Rambo 3 or Rambo 2. It was one of the Rambo movies. I think it was Rambo 3. Was supposed to be playing in a theater, and he really wanted to see that one. We had seen the other ones, but as a big group. He never went, just me and him. And so he wanted to see that Rambo 3 movie, and he asked me if I wanted to go, and I said I would. And so we went. It was like an hour away, and we got there, and we were the only two people in the theater, and the manager of the theater came in and said, well, guys, we changed the movie today. It's not Rambo, it's the Goonies. And your grandfather was not happy. But he said, well, we're here, we paid, we'll just sit and watch it. And we watched the whole thing, and he never said it, but I think he kind of liked it. But it was the only movie that your grandfather and I ever saw together, so by ourselves. So it was kind of it's kind of a special memory. That and the fact that, I actually met Josh Brolin years later and worked with him. We talked about this before, but he played Thanos in...
Brandon played Thanos?
Yeah, the guy who played Brandon played Thanos in the Avengers. It's the same
Cool.
person. He's also in the Deadpool movie, which you can't see, but good movie. All right, anything else? No? Yep, and this was the first time I think I had seen Robert Davi and Joseph Pantoliano, I think is how you say his last name. They were the brothers, Sloth brothers, as the villains. It was the first time I'd ever seen them, and both of them went on to fairly decent careers after that. So a lot of stars to be in there. And a lot of fun, especially for like a rainy Saturday afternoon or something. It's kind of a fun movie to put in. All right, so for you, yummy, crummy, edible?
Yummy and yummy. So I don't know what to say, but yummy and yummy.
Obviously, you liked it. And for me, it's definitely a yummy. As far as a parent guide, there's a few things in it. You might want to pre-screen it. Make sure, I'm sure most of you, if you're watching and you have kids Lainey's age, you've probably been exposed to this film already, so you know about it. So I guess we'll be Goon now.